In the summer of 1842, in the Essex village of Coggeshall, a Quaker smallholder named Henry Doubleday opened a wooden crate that had traveled 3,000 miles from the imperial palace gardens of St. Petersburg. He had ordered the cuttings inside to make glue for postage stamps. The glue experiment failed, leaving only a sticky mess on his desk and unused stamps. But wherever Doubleday planted those cuttings, something changed. Cattle nearby gave more milk. Pigs fed the leaves grew faster than pigs fed grain. He spent the next 30 years of his life trying to tell anyone who would listen. He died in 1902, penniless. His notes were burned by his family within a week of his funeral. The plant survived. And in 2001, the United States Food and Drug Administration banned every dietary supplement that contained it. Stick around, because the reason they banned it has nothing to do with your garden. Right now, across the United States and the United Kingdom, gardeners are spending an average of $240 a year on bottled liquid plant food. Bottles of dark concentrate that promise to feed their tomatoes, their peppers, their roses, their lawns. The active ingredients in most of those bottles are nitrogen, potassium, and trace minerals. The exact same three things, in higher concentrations than the bottle delivers, are produced for free by a single perennial plant that grows knee-high in a corner of the yard and lives for 20 years on a single root cutting. The part most gardeners get wrong is not the recipe, it's that they were sold a problem the plant in their own hedgerow already solves. In 1953, before he founded what would become the largest body of organic gardeners in the world, an English horticulturalist named Lawrence Hills wrote a book arguing this plant could feed a hungry world. 48 years later, the FDA pulled it off American shelves. This is the story of what it does, why it was buried, and exactly how to grow it in your yard this season. The plant is called Comfrey. Botanical name Symphytum officinale in its wild form, Symphytum uplandicum, Russian comfrey. In the hybrid form Doubleday brought back from St. Petersburg by accident. It's a perennial in the borage family. The leaves are large, hairy, and lance-shaped. The flowers hang in purple and white bells from late spring to the first frost. But the part that matters is invisible. The taproot grows up to 3 meters straight down, 6 to 8 feet, punching past the topsoil layer where every other garden plant feeds, into the deep subsoil where minerals have been quietly accumulating for centuries. Calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, iron, boron. The comfrey root pulls them up by the gram, hour after hour, season after season, and stores them in the leaves. Comfrey leaves contain 24% protein on a dry matter basis, in the same nutritional class as alfalfa, but with a vastly greater yield. In temperate regions, a well-established comfrey patch produces 50 to 60 tons of leaf per acre per year. By volume, that's 20 times more protein than soybeans. You did not buy any of those minerals. The plant mined them for you. From soil so deep the bottled fertilizer industry cannot reach it. This is not new knowledge. Every civilization on Earth figured this out independently. Around 400 BC in classical Greece, the historian Herodotus documented comfrey root as a remedy for severe bleeding. The Greeks named it after the verb symphein, meaning to grow together, because of what the boiled root did when pressed against a wound. Between 50 and 70 AD, the Greek physician Dioscorides, who served as Nero's medical officer to the Roman army, wrote De Materia Medica, the oldest pharmacopoeia in Europe. Comfrey appears in it for wound healing, broken bones, and gastrointestinal complaints. His Roman contemporary, Pliny the Elder, ran an experiment that earned the plant its English nickname. He boiled comfrey roots in water and watched a sticky paste form. A paste that, when poured between 2 pieces of raw meat, glued them back together. The Anglo-Saxons translated his observation into a single word that survives in every English-speaking garden today: knitbone. In the 12th century, an extraordinary woman picked up the same plant in a different language: Hildegard von Bingen, Benedictine abbess, composer, mystic, healer. In 2012, the Catholic Church would name her one of only 4 female doctors of the Church in 2,000 years of Christianity. But in her own lifetime, she was simply the most influential medical writer in medieval Germany. In her work, Physica, written around 1150, she documented comfrey for skin wounds, ulcers, and broken bones. And then she did something almost nobody else in the corpus did. She warned against eating it. Comfrey heals what is outside, she wrote, but can harm what is within if taken without measure. 850 years before the Food and Drug Administration would say the same thing. The 17th century English physician Nicholas Culpeper called comfrey so powerful to consolidate and knit together that if dissevered pieces of flesh be boiled with it in a pot, it will join them together again. And in 1842, Henry Doubleday's accidental crate arrived in Essex. The Quaker smallholder had ordered comfrey cuttings expecting standard wild comfrey from the Russian imperial gardens. What he received instead were chance seedlings between two species the imperial gardener had planted side by side. The cuttings were first-cross hybrids. They had hybrid vigor. They grew taller, faster, and richer in protein than any wild comfrey had ever been recorded to grow. Doubleday had no idea he was about to become the second link in a chain of researchers whose work would be erased the moment they died. In 1917, Britain was in the third year of the First World War. German submarines were sinking merchant ships in the North Atlantic at a rate the British Admiralty could no longer hide. Before the war, Britain imported 70% of its cheese and sugar, 80% of its fruit, 90% of its cereals and fats. Even British livestock depended on imported fodder. By 1917, that supply chain was bleeding out. And in the agricultural press of that year, a recommendation appeared. Comfrey, the same hybrid Doubleday had brought back from St. Petersburg, was promoted as a field crop to provide sustenance for pigs during the wartime winters. Pigs fed Comfrey through the winter of 1917 and 1918 came out the other side stronger than pigs fed standard fodder. The war ended. The submarines stopped. The cheap imported soybeans came back. And Comfrey once again slipped out of the agricultural conversation for 25 years. In 1938, a retired land agent named James Kenneth Crawley, who had recently bought a 20-acre smallholding outside the village of Lockerbie in Dumfriesshire, Scotland, planted his first comfrey patch. He was 55 years old. He had spent his entire career managing other people's farms. He had decided to spend his retirement quietly proving that the plant, the British government kept forgetting, was the answer to the food security problem the next war was already pulling toward Europe. Crawley fed his comfrey to cattle, sheep, and pigs through every wartime winter from 1939 onward. He kept meticulous records, cut by cut, weight by weight, animal by animal. On the 28th of February 1942, the Scottish Farmer magazine published his first article. The title was Prickly Comfrey, a Neglected Fodder Crop. 2 months later, in April, the Journal of the Land Agents Society published his second. Within weeks, Crawley was buried in letters from farmers across wartime Britain asking for plants. He divided his patch and divided it again. Every penny he earned from those plant sales he donated, in full, to the local nursing association. He died in November of 1943. He was 70 years old. Within days of his funeral, his family, believing his notebooks to be of no value, destroyed them. The 2 published articles are the only thing that survives. 41 years after Henry Doubleday's notes were burned by his family in Coggeshall, a second researcher's entire life's work went up the same chimney in Lockerbie. The pattern is so exact that when Lawrence Hills sat down to write his definitive book on comfrey 30 years later, he called Kenneth Crawley the father of modern comfrey growing and described the loss of his records as a great and double loss to the cultivation of this plant in this country. That sentence, read by a young horticulturalist in a military hospital bed, is the reason the plant is still in your reach today. On the 6th of June, 1944, D-Day, a 32-year-old British horticulturalist named Lawrence Donegan Hills was invalided out of the Royal Air Force. He spent the rest of the war in and out of military hospitals. He read, he wrote, he planned. And in those hospital months, an idea took hold of him that would define the next 40 years of his life. The British government and the British agricultural press kept losing the same plant. Twice now. He was going to make absolutely certain it did not happen a third time. In 1948, Hills, now 37, began his own comfrey research. In 1953, he published a book called Russian Comfrey. In 1954, on 3/4 of an acre near Braintree in Essex, he founded the Henry Doubleday Research Association. He named it after the Quaker smallholder whose burned notes nobody else would ever honor. In his own words, "It is because I was determined that the work I began on comfrey in 1948 should not be destroyed that I founded the Henry Doubleday Research Association in 1954 and named it in honor of this Quaker who died poor." Over the next 2 decades, on those Bocking trial grounds, Hills and his team cultivated, cross-pollinated, and numbered more than 20 distinct comfrey strains. Every cultivar tagged with the village name and a number. Bocking 1, Bocking 4, Bocking 14. By the late 1950s, one cultivar emerged as the clear winner. Bocking number 14. Highest leaf yield. Perfect nitrogen-phosphorus-potassium balance. Deep purple flowers. And crucially, sterile. Bocking 14 produces almost no viable seed. You cannot accidentally seed your neighbor's lawn with it. It can only be propagated by taking a piece of the root and planting it. By 1986, when Hills retired, the Henry Doubleday Research Association was the largest body of organic gardeners in the world. The 1987 Channel 4 television series his association hosted, All Muck and Magic, was drawing 3.5 million viewers a week. Lawrence Donegan Hills died on the 20th of September 1990. His notebooks did not burn, and the science he started has been verified, independently, by 2 different research institutions in the last 4 years. In 2021, researchers at the Leibniz Institute for Farm Animal Biology in Germany published a peer-reviewed analysis of Bocking strain Comfrey leaves. They measured 352 grams of crude protein per kilogram, 64.9 grams of potassium per kilogram, and 10.8 grams of calcium per kilogram on a dry matter basis. The exact same mineral profile Hills had measured by hand in his trial ground in 1957. In 2025, a 6-year Chinese soil study found that Comfrey planted in nitrogen-saturated ground captured 66% of the excess nitrogen, dropped soil nitrate concentrations by 64%, and raised the soil pH by a full point. They were measuring exactly what Doubleday had observed in 1842 by eye. Before I go any further, a quick note. What Hills built at Bocking was not one recipe, it was a system. Comfrey is the foundation, the perennial that mines the deepest minerals. But it works best as part of a 4-plant rotation that British and Russian smallholders relied on for generations before bottled fertilizer existed. There's a stinging nettle ferment that does for nitrogen what Comfrey does for potassium. There's a yarrow and Comfrey compost activator that the Soil Association still uses today. There's a Russian wood ash leach for potassium that Hills documented in his trials. It dates back to peasant kitchens in the Volga Basin. I've put all 4. Exact quantities, exact timing, exact dilution rates, every cited source, into a free PDF called The Forgotten European Soil Vault. It's the British and Russian counterpart to the Korean vault many of you already have. The link is pinned in the description below this video. Drop your email and it lands in your inbox in under 60 seconds. Use it as your complete temperate climate playbook. The 4 preparations together will replace a 4-figure annual fertilizer bill. Now, back to the part most of you came here for, because the next chapter of this story is the reason the FDA got involved. The global fertilizer industry was valued at more than $200 billion in 2024. The liquid fertilizer segment alone, the small dark bottles that line the shelves at every garden center, was worth roughly $20 billion of that. None of that revenue depends on plants growing well in the long run. It depends on customers coming back next spring to buy another bottle. A perennial plant that lives 20 years on a single root cutting and produces its own fertilizer for free is not a product. It is a threat to a product category. This is not a conspiracy. It is simpler than that. It is market logic. A plant that cannot be patented cannot be marketed at scale. A plant that cannot be marketed at scale will not get research funding. A plant without research funding will not be cited by university extension programs, because those programs are partly underwritten by industry grants. A plant not cited by extension will never reach the local garden center shelf. The chain is automatic. Nobody has to plot anything. The system simply forgets. And on the 6th of July, 2001, the system did something more direct. On that day, the United States Food and Drug Administration sent a letter to every member of the American Herbal Products Association, advising manufacturers to immediately remove all dietary supplements containing Comfrey from the market. The cited reason was hepatotoxicity, the same family of pyrrolizidine alkaloids that Hildegard von Bingen had warned against 850 years earlier. The ruling was correct on the toxicology. It was also the perfect rationale for removing a perennial competitor from a multi-billion-dollar shelf. Both things can be true at the same time. And here is the part most viewers will only catch if they are listening closely. The exact same nutrients you can grow at home for the price of one root cutting are sold in concentrated form at premium garden centers, in shiny 12-ounce bottles for $24 to $32 a piece. They take a leaf you can grow for free in your own yard, ferment it in a factory, dilute it into a bottle, and sell it back to you for 30 times what it's worth. That is the entire business model. That is the wall that has been built around Lawrence Hill's 3/4 acre plot in Bocking. The math doesn't work anymore. Now to the part most of you came here for. Picture a glass jug late summer evening holding a liquid the color of strong black tea. Dark, almost opaque, with a faint earthy smell, somewhere between pond water and warm hay. That liquid is plant food strong enough to feed a 100-square-foot vegetable bed for an entire season. It cost $5 to produce, and it came from a single root cutting that was planted 12 weeks earlier. This is the complete program. 4 steps. About $5 in startup ingredients. 1 root cutting that will live and produce for the next 2 decades. Step 1. Source the root cutting. Buy 1 Bocking 14 root cutting from a specialty perennial plant nursery. Coe's Comfrey in Vermont, Big Bloomer's Flower Farm in North Carolina, or Strictly Medicinal Seeds in Oregon if you are in the United States. Garden Organics online catalog or Sutton Seeds in the United Kingdom. Expect to pay $8 to $15 or 4 to 8 pounds for a single root section. That 1 cutting is the only purchase you will make for the next 20 years. Planted in spring 6 inches deep, in a partially sunny location you have permanently committed to. Bocking 14 will grow back from any piece of root left in the ground. Choose your spot like you mean it. A back corner, an unused fence line, behind a fruit tree. Step 2. First cut. Once the plant reaches 18 inches tall, cut all leaves to 4 inches above the ground using clean shears. Wear gloves. The leaf hairs irritate skin. 1 mature plant produces 3 to 4 kilograms of leaf per cut, 4 to 5 cuts per growing season. Step 3. And here's the part that, if you get it wrong, the whole thing rots into something useless. And most YouTube Comfrey tutorials skip it. Place 1 pound, 450 grams, of fresh chopped comfrey leaves into a 5-gallon food-grade plastic bucket. Cover with 1 U.S. gallon 3.8 liters of rainwater or dechlorinated tap water. If you're using municipal water, leave it uncovered overnight to let the chlorine evaporate. Weigh the leaves down with a clean stone so they stay submerged below the water line. Cover the bucket with a loose-fitting lid. Do not seal it. This is the part nobody tells you. The fermentation must breathe. A sealed lid produces hydrogen sulfide and the whole batch turns into something you cannot use. A loose lid lets the right bacteria multiply and the wrong ones die. Place it in a sheltered outdoor corner. Not in your kitchen, not in your garage. The fermentation smells terrible, like a stagnant pond mixed with manure. The smell is the proof it is working. Step 4. Harvest. After 4 to 6 weeks at temperatures between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius, the liquid will be very dark, almost black, and the leaves will have collapsed into sediment. Strain through a piece of burlap or an old cotton t-shirt into clean glass jugs. Store sealed in a cool, dark place for up to 6 months. Apply at exactly 1 part. Concentrate to 15 parts water. 1 cup of concentrate per 15 cups of water in a watering can. Pour at the root zone of tomatoes, peppers, fruiting plants, and roses every 2 to 3 weeks during the growing season. 1 mature Bocking 14 plant. 1 $5 investment. 80 to 100 gallons of diluted plant food per year. That is your entire backyard garden's annual fertilizer bill for free for the next 20 years. I need to be honest with you about something the bottled plant food sellers will never tell you. And the FDA will not tell you either, even though they were technically correct in 2001. Comfrey contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids. Eaten in any meaningful quantity, those alkaloids cause liver damage. They are genuinely hepatotoxic. Hildegard knew it in 1150. The FDA confirmed it in 2001. They were both right. Yes, they were. What the FDA never said, what nobody at the agency was required to say, is that none of this matters for the soil. Pyrrolizidine alkaloids break down in the soil microbiome within weeks. They do not accumulate in tomato fruit, in pepper flesh, in lettuce leaves, in any edible part of any plant grown in Comfrey-fed soil. The risk is in the leaf eaten directly. The benefit is in the leaf returned to the ground. It was banned for what it does inside you. The plant was always meant for the soil. 2 more honest limitations. Bocking 14 is cold hardy to 35 below 0 Celsius, but it struggles in extended drought above 32 degrees Celsius, 90 degrees Fahrenheit. If you are in Phoenix or Dallas, you will need afternoon shade and reliable mulch, and the plant will spread aggressively from any piece of root left in the ground. Once you plant it, you have planted it forever. 3 summers ago, a retired school teacher named Eleanor Whitmore outside Roanoke, Virginia, Zone 7A, heavy red clay, a backyard garden her late husband had given up on, planted 1 Bocking 14 root cutting she had ordered from a perennial nursery in North Carolina. She paid $11 including shipping. The previous 3 years, she had spent $840 on bagged compost, organic liquid fish emulsion, and the premium plant food bottles her local garden center recommended. Her tomatoes had still cracked. Her peppers had still stayed pale. By the end of the second summer, that single Bocking 14 plant had produced enough leaf for 40 gallons of diluted plant food. Her tomato skins were thick. Her peppers were dark and heavy. Her total fertilizer spend that year, including the $11 root cutting, was $11. $840. Down to 11. The math doesn't work anymore. The Greeks watched Comfrey knit bone in 400 BC. The Romans named it. The Anglo-Saxons translated the name. Hildegard von Bingen drew it in her Physica in 1150 and warned of the same alkaloids the FDA would name 850 years later. Culpeper put it on every English apothecary shelf in 1652. Henry Doubleday opened a crate in 1842, and his family burned his notes in 1902. James Kenneth Crawley wrote 2 articles for the Scottish Farmer in 1942, and his family burned his notebooks in 1943. Lawrence Hills read both losses, walked into a hospital bed on D-Day, walked out at the end of the war, and made absolutely certain it would never happen a third time. You just remembered all of it. So tell me in the comments below, where are you starting? Team Heritage Garden. You're going to plant Bocking 14 in a corner of your existing vegetable bed this season and rotate it into your tomato feeding program. Team Rescue Soil. You have a tired, exhausted patch of ground that's been losing year after year, and you're done buying bottles. This is the last chance. Team Lawn Conversion. You're tearing out chemical turf and rebuilding it into a living perennial system, and Comfrey is your anchor plant. Whichever team you're on, drop the name in the comments. I read every one of them. The patterns I see across thousands of comments shape every video that comes after this. If this surprised you, share it with one gardener in your life who has spent the last decade buying bottles. Every quiet patch of Comfrey in a backyard corner is a vote against $200 billion of marketing, and a debt repaid to 2 men whose notes were burned. Subscribe to the Old Ways Archive, where every week the old, real, almost forgotten ways of growing food are pulled back into the sunlight. One quiet story at a time. Keep your hands in the earth. Keep your soil alive.